What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
Welcome back to America Trends, the second installment on the state of Israel.
With us is Avi Jorisch, author of Thou Shalt Innovate, bringing attention to the ancient roots of Israel's innovative spirit and how this drive to improve the world is having an impact on the global stage. Avi, I know that your book focuses on innovation among Israeli citizens of varying religions, but any reading of Jewish history points to the achievements in science or medicine, the arts, technology, that are almost unfathomable given the small population of Jews in the world. Would you like to comment on that?
I mean, look, the book really does focus on all faiths, primarily Jews. I feature 15 innovations that have gone global and impacted the lives of billions of people. And essentially what we're looking at, the drive, as I see it, that is really promoting this culture of innovation in a highly innovative society is a combination of the prophetic tradition of 3,000 years coupled with modern history. For 3,000 years, our prophets have been telling us a number of things. One, be a light unto the nations. We've been praying 3 times a day to repair the world. We strongly believe that we're our partners with God in spreading social justice and morality. The Mishnah, the classic body of Judaic teachings, instructs us no less than 10 times to repair the world. As my colleagues in Israel like to remind me, we as Jews were not a nation of saints, but we are a nation that has been seeking higher meaning for over 3 millennia. And essentially what you have is when you have this prophetic tradition and you repeat every single day, make the world a better place, feed the hungry, clothe the needy, repair the world day in and day out, that ultimately has a deep and lasting impact on a culture's DNA. And the state of Israel today essentially is what is the manifestation of technology and the prophetic tradition. There's no denying that there's no single narrative that defines the state of Israel, but similarly there's no denying that Israel today has a tremendous number of entrepreneurs and innovators that are bound together not by religion, stature, or a desire to make money, but rather a desire to save lives and make the world a better place.
Much of the innovation in America scientifically over the last 30 years or so has come from the space program. Now, given the money and the attention that Israel has to pay to defense, are some of these advances a spin-off, or could Israelis be doing even more if this brain power wasn't going into the military often in the way that it is?
It's hard to really answer that question because the military really has been one of the driving forces for innovation. As my colleagues Saul Singer and Dan Sino write in their book, Startup Nation, which was an amazing book about the economic miracle of this thing.
Right, and that had a lot of impact on you, yes.
Absolutely, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But they essentially have a number of factors that underlie this innovative culture. And they point to the military, great universities, a diverse culture, resource scarcity, smart governmental programs. They even point to chutzpah. I just don't think they went far enough. And my conversations with Saul and Dan, they say, we really did not talk about Jewish culture. And it's the combination of the military, the chutzpah, the great universities, plus Jewish culture that I really feel gives you the full picture of the state of Israel. The military and the universities, they only go so far in explaining what is caused or what is the underlying pinnings of the innovative culture of Israel. But it is the combination of the two that really gives you a full picture.
Well, there is a debate, of course, in the U.S. about research and development. Should it all be coming from the private sector? How much should be subsidized by the government? What is the mix in Israel like for this entrepreneurial spirit?
It's hard to really point to a number, but I can tell you that they've got very smart government programs that essentially subsidize specific entrepreneurs that go through a Shark Tank-like process, where they essentially provide either 80% or 50% of the startup capital required to start a project/business. And if a company succeeds and they pay that back in the form of a zero-interest loan, and if it fails, it's forgiven as a grant. And that really does do a tremendous amount to drive an innovative culture and essentially move the ball on failure being 100% legitimate. When failure is part of the process, innovation comes as a result. And that is something that Israel does quite well. When there is an idea that failure is not only acceptable, but is a necessary component of any business, you see a highly innovative society.
Many people have questioned what the contributions to technology, science, agriculture, and the like have been among Muslims over the recent history of the world. You do point out, and let's surprise some people, that there is a lot of innovation that is a marriage of Jews and Muslims and Christians within the context of Israel. Help us sort that out.
Sure. Let me give you a few examples that I think are really wonderful in that regard. The emergency bandage, which is a specialized bandage that stops bleeding immediately by essentially moving a special lever forwards and backwards and sideways to adjust the pressure, is standard issue in the U.S. military today, the Israeli military, many other law enforcement bodies throughout Europe and Asia, and incidentally saved the life of Congresswoman Gabby Giffords when she was shot. It was founded by an American who made Aliyah, became a medic in the Israeli military. He eventually sold his piece of the company, and it is now headed by a Jew of Yemeni descent. But the bandage itself is produced in the northern part of Israel in a factory that's owned by a Muslim Bedouin man who only employs 50 women. So you have here Jews working with Muslims and a combination of women, and you see here a wonderfully diverse venture that is helping save millions of lives around the world. Or take, for example, a company that's based in Nazareth that is owned and operated by a couple who's named Imad and Reem Yunus. Their company is called Alpha Omega, and they got their name directly from the Book of Revelations. And essentially, it's I am the Alpha, I am the Omega, I am the first and the last, I am the beginning, I am the end. And they have created what I like to call the GPS for the brain. They help brain surgeons around the world. Their technology is located in thousands of hospitals. Place the electrodes in the exact spot in the brain in order to pulse it for neurological diseases like Tourette's, like essential tremor, like Parkinson's. Or take, for example, another wonderful venture called United Hatzalah, which is a nonprofit. They have created a number of things. One, they have put together an army of emergency responders around the country. They have about 5,000 emergency responders, and they are Muslims, Christians, and Jews, women, men, of all faiths, of all kinds. So you have these 5,000 emergency responders. Every one of those emergency responders has an app on their phone, and so when there is an emergency, the 5 nearest individuals are paged, and they are sent to the scene of an emergency. And many of those emergency responders are given something called an ambucycle, which is a half ambulance, half motorcycle, and it allows these emergency responders to get to the scene of an emergency very quickly. Now, the problem they were trying to solve was, until United Hatzalah came into the picture, ambulances took 20 minutes to get to the scene of an emergency in Israel, which was a very, very long time. If you think of the fact that if someone is having a heart attack, you only really have about 6 minutes before you can save their life. 20 minutes took too long. And so what they did was they cut down the time that it took an emergency responder to get to the scene of an emergency down from 20 minutes down to 3 minutes on average anywhere in the country, and in major cities, 90 seconds. Now, it still takes an ambulance roughly 20 minutes to get there, but now you have an emergency responder that's able to get there much, much quicker, saving a lot more lives. And that, the combination of those innovations, this Avi cycle, this application, which essentially serves as the Uber of emergency responders, and then you have this army of 5,000 individuals that come rushing to save people's lives in an emergency, and there are Muslims, Christians, and Jews, really is a wonderful innovation that is saving lives all over the country, and incidentally, is used, that this technology is used in 20 countries around the world today.
Well, I wanted to know about the adaptability of this Israeli technology and what kind of goodwill ambassador some of these innovations are for the state of Israel, because many of us have seen Israel often isolated on the world stage. Is this beginning to bring them closer to allies and enemies alike, given the universal need for some of these technologies and these changes?
I'm so glad you asked that question. The answer is a resounding yes. First, let's look at the innovations that I just mentioned and see if they're present in the United States. United Hatzalah is operating in Jersey City today, and that model is absolutely reproducible anywhere in the United States of America and around the globe. The GPS for the Brain, which is by Imad and Reem Yunus, this Nazareth-based company, are in hundreds of hospitals in the United States today and thousands of hospitals around the world. The emergency bandage is standard issue in the U.S. military and in law enforcement, in the law enforcement community around the country. And that is just naming a few. When you talk about drugs, when you come up with other scientific advances, or food, or medicine, they're definitely used in the United States and around the world, and they are really saving and improving the lives of millions, if not billions of people around the world. Now, when you talk about this idea of goodwill ambassador, I can't help but think about this idea of water. Israel, in 2013, declared water independence from the environment and from its neighbors. In other words, it has a surplus of water, and it did that by engaging in a number of different techniques. One, it has 6 desalination plants around the country. 2, it uses drip irrigation. It was the founder, the innovator behind drip irrigation, was a guy by the name of Simcha Blas, who in the 1960s created these small plastic tubes that drip out water very slowly, where farmers use 1/3 of the water, and they actually produce a doubling of the yield. And that technology, in and of itself, is used by billions of people around the world. And lastly, they actually, when we flush our toilets, Israelis remove the waste, and they recycle 90% of that water, and they use it in the agricultural sector. So Israel recycles 90%. That's in number one. The second country down recycles only 17% of its water. And far below that is the United States. We only recycle 8% of our water. Now, this combination that Israel has used, this model, is people are starting to notice that Israel is the only water superpower around the world. Now, let's take, for example, Israel's enemies. Iran, in the next 15 or 20 years, half of its population are going to become water refugees. Egypt, a country which it signed peace agreement with in 1979, in 7 years is going to have a water problem of biblical proportions, according to the United Nations. Where do you think those countries are going to look for first in order to help them solve their water problem? Israel is the only country in the world that has figured out this combination. So when I look at Israel's future, and I look at the future of the world, which is becoming more resource scarce, and now you look at one of the few countries in the world that is solving some of these problems. This is one of the smallest countries in the world, solving some of our largest challenges, and I see a very, very bright future for the state of Israel.
Is Israel working now with South Africa as it relates to their meltdown in Cape Town in terms of their water crisis?
So 3 years ago, Israel offered its assistance in order to avert what is now being called this D-Day, which is quickly approaching, where Cape Town runs out of water sometime in May or June. And as late as last month, South Africa refused Israel's help, but actually in the last week or two, they have now turned towards Israel to ask them for their assistance. Now, South Africa refused Israel's help because of Israel's conflict with the Palestinians. Now, I should point out that the Palestinians themselves work with Israel on their water crisis and their water needs. And so it should surprise no one that countries like South Africa will eventually turn to Israel for this technology. People around the world are going to need water. They're going to increasingly need food. And Israel has been solving these challenges for 70 years.
There is this disinvestment movement around the world at times. We hear more about it at other times less. Disinvestment in Israel. Does that propel Israel to become more innovative? Does it encourage them or discourage them in terms of some of this groundbreaking work that they're doing?
Look, if you look at some of the largest multinational companies in the world, Apple, Google, Cisco, Intel, they all have a presence in Israel. These companies are voting with their feet. Many, many companies around the world, huge multinational companies, have set up research and development arms in the state of Israel. They have offices in Israel. This is, when you look at the most innovative companies in the world, they haven't turned their back on Israel. They've rather run there full force.
When we look at the desert, and we look at the fact that many of us might think of Israel as being innovative because it is out of necessity, and we think about what they've done to make the desert bloom. Was that a lot of where this started, that they were so isolated, they were on a piece of land that didn't have a lot in terms of natural resources? Is this where it all began?
I really tend to think that certainly it's not, there's no one factor, because there's lots of countries around the world that are resource scarce, that are located in a desert, right? It's this combination of military service, resource scarcity, great universities. You have this chutzpah culture married with a prophetic tradition of 3,000 years whereby people are repeating day in and day out, make the world a better place, help the needy, feed the poor. And so when you have this prophetic tradition, and you marry it with these modern-day challenges, and I would even tend to say bonuses, that you see the modern state of Israel.
What about the confluence of Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardic Jews, people coming from all over the world looking for this to be their new home or a reestablishment of an old home? How important was all of that, bringing all these minds from around the world?
Absolutely critical. You look at some of the most innovative cultures around the world today, one of the few common denominators is a highly diverse culture. Even in the most successful companies around the world today, we're seeing diversity as being one of the key drivers of innovative cultures, both in companies and in countries. And so given the fact that you have Jews coming from all over the world, and Israel is not just a Jewish country, but you have Muslims, Christians, Jews of American descent, Iraqi descent, Yemeni descent, Polish descent, Russian descent, leads to a very, very highly innovative society.
You talked about desalination of water, and that's one that we still think is so beyond the pale in terms of the economics of it. I know there are people working on it all over the globe. What has Israel done in that realm? And will that ultimately be perhaps the most important contribution to the sustenance of the world over time?
Israel is, actually, as it turns out, desalination was originally created. The modern desalination technique, the most popular, was created by an American Jew who was in California. 2 years after he created it, he moved to Israel, and it was perfected in the state of Israel. And eventually, Israel's largest company for desalination is called IDE. And that company today has built the largest desalination plant in the Western Hemisphere in California, the largest desalination plant in China and India. And so Israeli technology in that regard really is making an impact in some of the largest, most populous countries around the world. We are seeing increasing water memorandums of understandings between Israel and many other countries around the world, and I expect that trend to continue. Israel, as I said before, is the only country in the world that now has a water surplus. It has a water surplus as a result of all the innovation that it has created, and it is now completely independent of the weather and its neighbors. And this is a model that can be used around the world.
As we're looking at China and the U.S. really competing for economic dominance in the next 20, 30 years, and we see the strategy that China is employing, the United States, I'm not quite certain I quite see the strategy. But the question is, do they both look at Israel and say, wow, this is an incubator, this is a country that we really need to embrace as an R&D center for our development, in contrast to our competing economic partner or competitor, whatever we are to each other, China and the U.S. Put that in some perspective for us.
If you just look at delegations that are coming to Israel, both American and Chinese, there is not a week that goes by that you don't have many, many delegations of either policymakers, company executives, research and development scientists that are every week you have those types of individuals that are coming to Israel. These are the types of people that are coming in order to find solutions to modern day problems. And Israel has shown a great propensity for, a great desire, a great ability to solve some of these problems. And so it should surprise no one that these delegations are coming. And it's not just the Chinese and the U.S. You have the Europeans, you have people from Latin America, India, Japan. The flights are full coming to Israel. The startup nation is alive and well, and it is producing some of the most innovative technology in the world today. Israel is not just a startup nation. I tend to think of Israel as being a light-up nation. It is a light-up nation that is preparing us for the next generation when we are really a resource-scarce planet and helping us solve some of our greatest problems.
Avi Jorisch, when we try to define just about everything and break it down into metrics, this is the happiest nation in the world. This is a nation that excels in terms of academic achievement. Israel, as it relates to its ability to innovate, is there any scale that we could measure their impact per capita on the world as opposed to any other nation?
So as I mentioned in my book, there are more startups combined in Israel than Canada, India, Japan, Korea, and the United Kingdom combined. Another really interesting metric that I talk about in my book is the fact that outside of North America, Israel has more companies listed on the NASDAQ than any other country. So when you look at, those are two interesting indexes. The other is, of course, the happiness quotient. Israel is one of the, as you yourself point out, is one of the happiest countries on the planet today. I think those are three excellent examples of how you measure.
Yeah, well, America, I think, is number 18. Finland is number 1. Let me ask you, I was in Hawaii recently during the missile alert, and for some reason I didn't get terribly nervous, maybe thinking that he was unable, Kim Jong-un, to actually deliver. Or maybe I thought that there were defense systems in place from Guam and Samoa. Or maybe I was imagining the Iron Dome missile system was at work for us. Would I be wrong in any of those assumptions?
So let me start by saying that Israel in 2012 created a system that allows it to shoot out of the sky projectiles. That has never, ever happened in the history of humanity. My family, when we experienced the war of 2014 in Israel, while we would all go down to the bomb shelters, we all knew that the Iron Dome would primarily shoot these projectiles out of the sky with a 90% success rate. America does not have a similar system today to the Iron Dome. It does not have a system that allows it to shoot these projectiles out of the sky. Rafael, which is the company that developed the Iron Dome, has sold this technology to other countries around the world. It has not published a list of those countries, but I can tell you definitively, or at least according to Rafael, that they have not sold that system back to the United States. That is despite Israel's willingness to do so. And Congress played a huge role. Our U.S. policymakers and lawmakers played a huge role in the development of the Iron Dome, making huge checks to Rafael and the Israel Defense Forces. This system probably would not have come into place without the largesse of the United States and the United States Congress in particular. And we in the United States certainly ought to consider investing in a system like Iron Dome for our own here in the United States.
Avi Jorisch, the book is called Thou Shalt Innovate, How Israeli Ingenuity Repairs the World. Is there anything that you'd like to add before we end this conversation?
I would encourage your listeners to think about Israel in a different way. We are seeing Israel as a highly innovative society. Israel is a force for good. Israel has innovators that are influencing the lives of billions of people around the world. And as I talk about in my book, this country is full of promise. It is making the lives of billions of people around the world better. And as we look to the future of Israel is bright. As we look to solve some of our greatest problems, Israel can act as a resource in that regard.
Avi, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. I'd be happy to come back anytime, Larry.